How to apply Hitchcock's rules to your visual thinking. Learning things from other visual arts is always essential to enrich our visual thinking. So that's why today we will learn from movies, specifically from a tremendous director, Alfred Hitchcock. Hitchcock pioneered visual rules in cinema, which I will show you today. There are some specific techniques he invented that we can apply to our visual thinking to make our messages more visually compelling. Rely on visuals, not text. Very few people know that Hitchcock in his beginnings made some silent films because in that period there was no voice track. These films show dialogue with printed words on the screen that constantly interrupt the sequence flow. That's where Hitchcock learned to tell the story with the camera to minimize the number of titles that would interrupt the scene. He used to say that we should resort to dialogue only when it's impossible to do otherwise. How do you apply that to your visual thinking? Add text to your sketch notes only when it's necessary. Avoid overwhelming information for your audience. Always try to draw self-explanatory visuals. Avoid cliches. Hitchcock was always trying to avoid cliches.
Well, that's only because one's challenged by the audience. They're saying to me, show us. And I know what's coming next. And I say, do you? And therefore that's the avoidance of the cliche, automatically. They're expecting the cliche. And I have to say, we cannot have a cliche here.
Disrupt. Draw things people don't expect. If someone is talking about creativity, people expect you to draw a light bulb, but go for something else. Try to incorporate more disruptive metaphors rather than predictable cliche icons. Because every time you draw a cliche, you are setting areas of your map that people will ignore. Don't be redundant. Hitchcock talked about the counterpoint concept in his films.
I've always believed, but unfortunately you can never get it written this way, that the voice should never make the same statement that the face is making. In other words, if a girl says, I'm happy, and she's got a happy expression, you're saying the same thing twice, once with sound and once with a visual. Should be counterpointed. You know, a girl can be crying, and in an argument she can say, well, don't make me laugh.
Avoid being redundant. You don't necessarily need to put obvious keywords that describe what you are already depicting through an image. Disrupt. A great way to do this is to think in terms of opposites. So, for example, if you write awake, you draw sleep. If you write close, you can draw open. If you write protect, you can draw attack. So play with this and you will see that even if image versus text are contrarian, the images will have sense through this disruption. Where to improvise. Alfred Hitchcock once said something really interesting about improvisation.
No. People say to me, do you ever improvise on the set? And I say no. Any improvisations are made in the office while the film is being put on paper.
But is there really interest in
I mean, to improvise on the set with all those electricians and carpenters around, I personally don't see how it's done. I mean, imagine a composer with sheets of blank lines in front of him and 100-piece orchestra. And he's thinking, and then he calls up, he said, flute, give me a note, would you? And bloop, you get the note, and he writes it down. That's what improvisation is on the set, and I don't believe in it.
We cannot apply this rule in all visual thinking fields. Of course, you can improvise by taking personal notes on your sketch notes. You need to improvise while doing graphic facilitation or coaching, but what Hitchcock said about improvisation could apply to graphic recording. Most of the maps you see around fail on the lack of planning. Improvise while planning. As the speaker, you're going to map his presentation in advance. Most presentations and speeches follow a script, so as to have access to those scripts and do the improvisation while planning the ideas and metaphors you will draw the day of the graphic recording. If you improvise while doing the graphic recording on the event's day, you will end up collecting an insane amount of icons in a haphazard fashion. Direct the audience. Even if Alfred Hitchcock was a movie director, he didn't like the part about directing actors too much. He was obsessed with directing the audience rather than the actors. And this is something visual thinkers usually need to remember to do. People hardly read 100% of a map. And if you don't play with elements to drive the audience to those parts where you need them to read, your main messages will get lost. So how do you guide your audience eyes towards the information you want them to read? Use key metaphors as lighthouses. Incorporate big disruptive metaphors, images that make people wonder, what's going on here? And those are the images where the audience will direct their eyes. A way to make people read is to put key text near those images. Show key elements bigger. In Hitchcock's movies, the size of the image on the frame was proportional to its importance to the story. He used to zoom in to clarify that an element was crucial for the plot. How do you transfer that to your visual thinking? Play with sizes. Larger images inside your map will attract your audience's attention. Apply size according to importance. This will help you convey the critical information through visuals rather than text. Use color properly. 2 things about how Hitchcock managed color. The first is this one.
Well, there's always the basic, that is not to use color until you need it.
This is a good reminder because black and white visual notes are not wrong. They're not incomplete as many visual thinkers wrongly think. If you don't need color, just don't use it and take advantage of the high contrast images black and white gives you. One of the most famous Hitchcock movies, Vertigo, symbolically uses the color green. There is a connection between that color with the main character. Then the color is transferred to another of the characters. It's as if the color were one more element of the story. If you pay attention, when there was green, there was also red because he was playing with the complementary colors. Remember that we use complementary colors to create visual interests and direct contrast between the two. Complementary colors, it's a natural example of opposites attracting. So if you use color in your visual thinking, don't use it just as a decorative graphic element. Try to use it and apply color symbolisms or to highlight things you want to pop up on your sketch note or visual map. Always remember that color is a message in itself. Make your visual stock. In Alfred Hitchcock's movie, the visuals primarily tell the narrative. That's why they say you can watch his films with the sound turned off and still understand the story. Let me ask you a provocative question. Can people understand your visual maps or sketch notes without reading the text? Try to incorporate some of Hitchcock's techniques to boost the way you communicate through your visuals. Thank you.